Hi, following on from the blog, I'll be talking about passive house theory and the Earthship concept. So passive house is a voluntary energy efficiency standard. It's mainly in places in Europe like Germany, but we're starting to see an increase of people conforming to it in North America. So your house is rated as a passive house if it uses less than 15 kilowatts per square meter per year of energy for heating and cooling purposes. So as the name states, passive house is about smart design early on to reduce your energy bill and to take advantage of all that free heating and cooling that nature's throwing at us. In Australia, in general, about 40% of our energy bills go towards this auxiliary heating or cooling. So when we design our houses, if we could think about ways to maximize that free energy given by the sunlight and the wind, when we design the walls, the roof, the floors, the windows, and even the actual orientation of our house, we could minimize this usage of fossil fuels. Now, passive house designs have to be done early on because they basically deal with the whole foundations of your whole house, and it'll get very expensive if you do it later. Whoever's designing the passive house really has to have thorough knowledge of the local climate, because they have to know how is the wind and the sunlight and the temperature going to behave throughout all 4 seasons. Just in Australia itself, there's 8 different distinct climate regions. So they must have site-specific knowledge. It can't just be a volume build. So with a passive house, there's 2 main things we want to happen, and that's solar heating and solar cooling. Now, within that, there are a few elements we want to look at. Firstly, we want to look at orientation. Now, in Perth, you're going to want all your main windows facing north, so you get that beautiful morning sun, but none of that horrible afternoon, very low sun is hitting you. That should be hitting your side walls. So another thing we have to look at is thermal mass. So thermal mass are things in your house that are gonna absorb the energy when the sun's out, and when the sun sets, it's gonna start dissipating it. So it's useful when it's hot during the day but cold at night. But if you're somewhere that's stinking hot at night, you probably don't want too much thermal mass in your house. Another thing, ceiling. So you don't want any air leaks. About 15 to 25% of all the heat that's lost in winter is from air leaks, poor ceiling. So a house I used to live in, it was basically built on stilts, and it had this open cavity that was exposed beneath the main floorboards. Now those floorboards were getting old, so there was gaps in them, and a lot of heat was lost in that house due to that poor ceiling. Now, a major thing, insulation. So you want to think about the insulation in your roof and walls. During summer, if you do the insulation right, the heat won't get in. During winter, it won't escape. Now, another thing you can also think of, glazing, double, triple glazing. So that's multiple layers of glass with some inert gas or just air in between is very good insulation. Lets the light in, but the heat doesn't escape or get in, depending on the time. Now finally, we want to look at air movement. I saw this nifty design before of this porous wall that was hooked up to a rain tank. And basically they had created this sort of evaporative air conditioning because they created the walls of the house so the air would funnel through. Now that's pretty good in summer. So that was the passive house concept. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Earthship idea. So the idea of an Earthship was basically the brainchild of this architect in the 70s, Mike Reynolds. It's an off-grid solar passive house, basically. So the Earthship concept has 6 main elements to it. So firstly, it's got to have either geothermal or solar heating and cooling. Secondly, all the electricity has to be generated by either wind or solar energy. So we're going to need some photovoltaic cells or some wind turbines. Next, it's got to have its own sewage treatment. So that's going to be dry composting toilets or septic tanks. So the fourth element to an Earthship, it's got to be built out of both natural and recycled materials. So you might build it out of soil and rocks, and there's a video I'm going to link that shows them building it out of recycled bottles and old tires, along with soil. So fifth element, it's got to be able to harvest and store water, so perhaps a rainwater tank, maybe a filtration system. And lastly, there should be an internal ability for food production. So you might have some botanical cells hooked up with the grey water drainage or something. So the whole Earthship should be self-sufficient with the basic needs. So that is the Passivhaus and Earthship idea. So I'm hoping to take elements of these two ideas and combine them with the tiny house sort of movement idea for this business study. Thank you.